Okay, the name I gave to this panel was Requiem for a Republic, question mark. I think that's the thing that's all on our minds. We haven't even planned this very much. We're all just going to kind of wing it, but we all have things to say. And I'd like to go last, and Barry would like to go first. And take as much time as you want to. Well, you always have. You're always thinking about politics. You always have things to say.
But that's the problem. I always go first. Someone else should go first.
Why?
I don't know.
Okay, and here's, do you want this on the stand or to hold?
If you're feeling lost this morning, it's logical, and yet it's not. I expected this outcome.
Really?
Yes, really. I expected this outcome. I hate it, but I half expected it. I expected it, and yet I did not. And I'll tell you what I mean. Let me start by saying we need to face up to the fact that we've effectively sent an erratic, unpredictable, disruptive, predatory, vengeful, fascist grifter.
And those are the nice things.
Those are the nice things. We've sent him to the White House and handed him nuclear codes. Yet much of the post-election analysis will be soothing syrup, covering up that terrible reality. In doing so, we've also ransomed the government that empowers us, our precious republic, to a self-confessed would-be dictator. That's the truth of it. That's the truth of it. Both asleep and awake, I've had painful but fruitful conversations with Dr. Franklin. Ben, I said in answer to your question of whether we can keep the republic you gave us, I'd have to answer probably not. The future looks grim. But we have no choice but to try. We're not about to break faith with you and the sacrifices of all who came after. My thinking in answering his question is that this election loss produced not just a policy typical four-year alternate cluster of proposals concerning future government direction, but an alternative system of governmental empowerment. I hope you see the difference between the two. This is not an ordinary election where, well, we'll come back and instead of going northwest, we'll go southeast. It's not that at all. I hope that maybe it will turn out to be, but it doesn't look that way. And that system, that different system, bears little resemblance to Franklin's Republican form. So after that, hoping to consider the start of some sort of remedy to the situation, I redirected my thinking to how and why it happened. My overall conclusion startled me. It was nearly unavoidable. The outcome was nearly unavoidable. And that's why, despite incantations in the hallway here of I'm really optimistic, she's got it going, she's got it, she can't lose, I kept replying to people, it's up for grabs. It's up for grabs. I'm not saying the election outcome was inevitable, but it was very close to it from the start. And Democrats and Trumpers of both parties were unforgivably asleep at the wheel. People who were concerned early were undeniably correct, and here's why. Underscore this point in your thinking. And please, if you have access to the New York Times, look at Maureen Dowd's column this morning. I keep thinking that each time I read her that that's the best she's ever done, but this is the best she's ever done. Take a look at it, and I wish you were here today because she could say what she says better than I can say it this morning. Despite Trump securing a popular vote majority, the polls make clear that most Americans, without question, either despise or disrespect him. So what explains the outcome? The outcome was either a repudiation of Democrats and their policies, or a repudiation of incumbents, those who governed. So the axiom, if there is one, is something like this. When the choice is between what feels like an intolerable status quo, with frustration building and unattended to on the one hand, and trying almost anything different, even with some disputable price to pay, people will go with the change. And I guess the old saw is true, they'd even cut off their nose to spite their face. So Dr. Franklin, let's look at it historically. The founders who gave us a republic threw off the monarchical yoke, drove out the king, but at a high price, accepting slavery. They were not agreed on how long slavery would last, how far it would go territorially, how deep it would penetrate culturally, and so forth. And some of those matters are obviously still undecided, and they contaminate our unity as a people. But the point is, we should not be surprised at what happened. It was almost inevitable and predictable. And that concern would have had to have been recognized much earlier than Biden, his advisors, the Democratic leadership. Dare I mention those Saturday Matters participants here at U-House were capable of. That said, many would still like to think about what intervention perhaps early on might have made a difference, if that's useful. It would only be for the future, not for feeling better about laying blame elsewhere. Maybe I ought to stop and turn things over to other people, and then I can come back or something.
Who wants the mic next? Charlie, go ahead.
This is so interesting because I always consider myself as second only to Barry, the political most eager or most astute person in University House, is because, you know, I spend a lot of time down here reading the paper, and it's not just the comics that I read. But I was, unlike Barry, convinced that she would win. And one of the first things I did when Cordy and I got back here on October 12th was to call Barry up and said, we gotta meet, and I tried to convince Barry, unsuccessfully, that she would win. He didn't totally oppose me, I would say, but he was not unconvinced. Why did she lose? Well, I think Barry has already put his mark on that today, and I haven't yet really come to terms with it. But what I am struggling with is that I don't think the country will get together for the rest of the next 4 years, and we'll enter the next presidential term election a very, very divided nation. And as a patriot, and even my Trump friends, and I do have Trump friends, cannot feel good about that. So why did she lose? I am really coming to believe, and I'm somewhat fighting this, I am very angry at Joe Biden. And I think it was very early in 2021, I read a Peggy Noonan, who's a very, very good writer in the Saturday morning Wall Street Journal column, saying that he must not run for a second term. And ever after that, I was saying that, so I'll claim credit for feeling that throughout his term. But he did, and he persisted on doing so when, long before the disastrous debate, it was clear that it was not a good choice. Had he not done so, there would have been time for several very capable Democrats who, in their thinking, could be good presidents. Shapiro, Whitmer, and others, Newsom certainly, would have been making their case, respectful of President Biden, but saying that there is an election coming up, and I am putting my hat in the ring, so to speak, and you should give me the opportunity to be the candidate. And out of those that did so, try to offer, one of those would have, or two of those probably, would have seemed to be very, very good possibilities to be a very fine candidate. Well, of course, it wasn't to be. And so instead, finally, at last, Joe Biden realized, probably about the last Democrat in the country, that he should not be the one. And he had the power to throw it to Mrs. Harris. Well, disaster. Because she did not have time to build up the reputation. We have a friend in Mackinac that I've been close to on political matters for a long time, but she's from California, and she has never liked Harris. Reasons have been unclear to me, but she professes to have distinct reasons for not liking Harris. And the very day that Biden withdrew, I saw her and I said, Star, that's her nickname. What do you think? I wanted your honest opinion. And I want you to give me your honest opinion as the campaign develops. about what you think about Kamala Harris. Are you feeling the same way about her personally? Are you somewhat more positive toward her? Are you less positive toward her as the campaign develops? And I'm going to ask you periodically. I did so. And she deferentially to me, despite my saying, now come on, I want your honest opinion, she refused to do so. But it was clear to me the way she responded when I pressed her that she was not positive in her response to Mrs. Harris. Well, what does that indicate? That's one individual, but it did indicate to me that despite the very positive Democratic convention and the united feeling that Democrats presented about her, that she was not convincing people who didn't like Donald Trump, but weren't really getting to feel that she was up to the job. So I did begin, despite what I said when I started this morning, to have the feeling that it could happen. He could win. And I began even to think that what would I say about my own political abilities if, heaven forbid, Donald Trump won the election. Well, I sort of shut that off, it's not really going to happen. And I still really haven't come to terms with what to say. I think that unfortunately the country is going to be divided for 4 years, and as a person that wants to be an American patriot, I have to say, well, I don't like it, but he is our president, and we should, unite behind him. Yeah. But I don't know if I can. And I think that probably is something that pretty much all of you feel.
My talk will be more numbers than words. Pollsters like to slice and dice the electorate into all kinds of segments, the young versus the old, the educated versus the uneducated. At the during the earlier panel that Barry was the anchor for, I talked about the Catholic vote, and I noted that since the 1998 election, the Catholic vote, or the candidate who gets the majority of the Catholic vote, always wins the election. In 2020, Joe Biden got 52% of the Catholic vote. Trump got 41%. In this election, according to a report in the Washington Post, 56% of Catholics voted for Trump, and 41%. I'm sorry, that earlier number for Trump in 2020 was 47%. In this election, 56% of Catholics voted for Trump, and 41% for Harris. And then I looked at a wider scope of religious voting, and according to the Post, Trump's share of the vote of other Christians, not Catholics, but Christian, in 2020 was 60%. In 2024, it was 60%. I think I misread the earlier 2020 vote. It was probably in the high 50s. In any case, Christians supported Trump heavily in both elections. Meanwhile, this is very, very surprising when you think about it. Only 29% of non-Christian people of faith voted for Trump in 2020, and only 33% in 2024. That's Jews, Buddhists, Muslims, non-Christian people of faith overwhelmingly voted against Trump. What is finally quite revealing, only 21% of voters with no religion voted for Trump in 2020. And in 2024, the number was 25%. So Harris won, in effect, 75% of the votes of people who claim to have no religious affiliation. So here we have a situation where Christians went out in great numbers to vote in the 2024 election, and to represent our country, this great shining city on a hill that many of them claim is a Christian nation, they elected a convicted felon whose values and policies and practices and behavior are totally antithetical to Christian values. Now, Biden cast this election as a vote for democracy, that democracy was on the ballot. I would say one can make the case that Christian values were also on the ballot. And tragically, they both lost.
This is the election that women were supposed to win it for Kamala Harris. And and that, of course, is not true. If any of you voted here for Trump, don't tell me. I don't want to know. And try to figure out what happened with the women's vote in this election. I did what, we all do, sophisticated research. I Googled it. And one of the first headlines I came up with was white women handed the election to Trump. Well, that stings, but there is some truth to it. This was written by a columnist named L.Z. Granderson in the LA Times. He's an African-American man. And he said it was a big measure of misogyny and racism. White women, by and large, just do not want a woman of color for president. They want a white male. For whatever reason, and there have been a lot of reasons given. The economy, of course, because inflation, apparently that's the single most common reason people give for having voted for Trump. They had some very unpleasant experiences in the last few years, and it is unpleasant, especially if you're kind of economically constrained to see your grocery bills going up and up and up. I wonder why women didn't factor in some of the things that Trump had been saying about wanting to get rid of Medicare and the Affordable Care Act. If economic security, so anyway, but there's not too much logic in this. And then there's some other things I read that frankly pissed me off. James Carville, who made that famous saying about it's the economy, stupid. Well, he's right about that. But he said that the Democrats have become known as the party of preachy women. Okay, gonna blame it on the women? That made me angry. At least David Axelrod was a little bit more gender equal by calling it the smarty pants kind of party, the condescension and the contempt that people in the Trump voters heard from people like us, highly educated, professional people. And I have to confess, there was a lot of sneering and ridicule and so forth, of course. But damn it, they said stupid things. They were stupid. I can't help thinking that. Maybe we should just practice not showing it so much. It's true, just by the numbers, a few more numbers. When women were getting raked over the coals for our performance at the polls, it turned out to be true that Obama had less support from white women in 2008 than Al Gore did in 2000, or Biden did in 2020. And the striking fact about the vote for women is that although 54% of women voted for Kamala Harris, that's a smaller percentage than the ones who voted for Biden in 2020. And we're still trying to digest and figure that one out. So let me go back to something I've been telling myself all week. We are going to have to undergo, I think, some wrenching alterations of our thinking. I remembered that my mother and some people her age mentioned how much outrage some people felt and fear at the election of Franklin Roosevelt. He was a transformational kind of leader too. In fact, I've seen it said recently that Trump is just as transformational as Franklin Roosevelt. Well, I've always thought of him as someone who did good and saved the country, although if we have to remember there was a lot of overreach there too, and there were people who genuinely feared that he was going to destroy the country and our way of government and our way of life. So I've been trying to get myself into that mindset, not to agree with it, but to try to understand it a little more. It's hard, but if we're going to be the opposition for the next 4 years, and I heartily hope we all will be, I told Barry a couple weeks ago that if Trump wins, I'm going to start putting on as many programs as I can find people to talk about political resistance and civil disobedience.
Yay.
If you have any thoughts about that, please talk to me and prepare to help enlighten the rest of us. And you know, oddly, one more observation. As I was Googling different things about why did women vote for Trump, Of course, economic things, but one thing I noticed almost immediately was that I had to hunt and go down the list of results of my search before I found any articles written by women. So there's still a lot of mansplaining out there. That has not changed. Thank you. And Barry.
There is an explanation of why white women have a problem with black women candidates. And it's this. If you look at the caste ladder, the people who are at some rung on the caste and are protecting themselves don't worry about people who are way down the caste. They worry about the people who are at the rung immediately beneath them. So immediately beneath white women are black women. And that would explain the situation. Now, I can't give you evidence of that, and maybe it's not true, and maybe it didn't have any effect on this election, but it is a possible explanation, and I would offer that to you. Because people at the top of the ladder don't worry about people at the bottom of the ladder. The people at the bottom of the ladder don't really have to fight that people at the top, have to fight people at the next rung, the one that's immediately above them. And the people at that rung have to worry about the people that are immediately beneath them. So I think that has a lot to do with it. If we're looking at the errors that might have made a difference, it would have had to have been very early. And Charlie was too tough on himself because he was one of the people that came in very early and said, we've got to do something. And I wasn't so sure at that point. And it took a while for me to be convinced. And the second guy that convinced me, and I wasn't so sure, was Joe, sitting here on this panel, that we've got to do something. I wasn't so sure at the time. And then I became sure, and we got together and we started communicating, and we were sitting on the panels. There were three categories of things that could have made a difference early on, and I put them into three categories. There are tactically avoidable errors, things that could have been done. There were pre-existing, deteriorating demographic relationships. That's the second one. And the third were uncontrollable external factors. Okay? Things that were avoidable, things that had been long-term deteriorations, and external factors that were just uncontrollable. The Democrats got into trouble, as Karen pointed out. Well, I'm not sure she pointed this out exactly, but alluded to it. The Democrats insisted that the economy is in good shape and that the border has been effectively shut down. Both are highly suspect in the minds and hearts of the working class. And they were once the core of the Democratic Party. So this is what I mean when I talk about deteriorating demographic relationships. This is something that's happened over a couple of decades or more. That misleading, those misleading statements, misleading in the minds and hearts of the people. I'm not saying objectively and academically and you know, it irrevocably attached Kamala to the Biden policies. She was cemented to the administration at that point. Now, going back to Joe Biden's reneging on his implicit promise to be a one-term transitional president, I agree that that was a major contributing factor to Trump's success. And that was an early on factor. That was avoidable, except for Biden's ego and stubbornness. His ongoing stubbornness prevented Democrats from a normal primary contest for selecting and legitimizing the strongest candidate, and severely limited the time available, but you know all about that. Worse still was the Democratic leadership paralysis, the cover-up, the irresponsible inertia in signaling his growing limitations. They knew about it. They knew about it and they did nothing. That was preventable error, and that could have made a difference. And if you're entrusted with public responsibility, you're not granted the luxury of falling asleep at the wheel. An obvious external factor, realistically uncontrollable without crippling fundamental principles, is a combination of racial and gender bias. That was there, and of course we could avoid it by not ever nominating someone who is black or someone who is female. I don't think we want to do that. How big a factor was it? We don't know. It's too hidden to measure, but it's an external factor, something that was unavoidable. Another external factor beyond control, and it's very important and it's something that's very hard to realize, is that runaway global inflation has defeated virtually every party in power in every Western democracy. Every party in power in every Western democracy. It's hard for us to grasp, but that's true. And that goes toward inevitability. Democrats, another different point, Democrats are accused of overlooking the needs of traditional constituencies in favor of newer and narrower ones advanced by progressive idealists. Again, I suggest you read Maureen Dowd's column. She can say it much better than I can. Now, I don't know what to make of that, but some campaign experts insist that the Republicans, this is an example, their most effective final week ad was one attacking the so-called transgender invasion of young women's sports and their bathrooms. Crazy stuff, but it appears to have worked. It appears to have worked. Okay. Now again, if we're going to do something in the future, communication failure is thought to be an ongoing and growing contributing factor. Charlie reads the New York Times a lot. I read the New York Times a lot, and I'm sure Joe does. And maybe the Washington Post and the financial one.
Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal. The Democratic communication, the criticism is it tends to be directed toward the college-educated and the upper class instead of the working class. But maybe more importantly, there's a poor understanding and command of we keep reading the New York Times, but there's a new, powerful, online form of communication, and some people who are in charge of that technology, and we're talking now about YouTube and TikTok, and media control by untraditional influencers like Joe Rogan and Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And the result is that the Democrats poorly package even the most potentially persuasive arguments. And the Republicans are getting to voters that count. Some very worrisome contributing trends have been observed, especially the alienation of young men, the loss of the usual minority support, the loss of non-college voters, again, particularly white women. And one of the things that I wondered about, were white women neglected due to overconfidence that the women's vote was secure after Roe versus Wade was overruled? Conclusions about the percentage reductions in minority support need to factor in Trump's very clever, massive outreach effort to mail low propensity voters. Now, this was very successful. He reached out, and we didn't, Democrats didn't, to low propensity voters. This was ignored by the Harris campaign. He reached out to mail low propensity voters. They didn't count. These were black, they were Latino, Hispanic, and then he got to them, and they were the numbers that increased the percentages of those numbers behind Trump. Behind Trump. So don't be misled by the increased percentages. Those were the voters that came on. It wasn't the blacks and the if you forgive me, the browns that were leaving the Democratic Party. It was the ones that were added to the Republican Party. So again, let's look in the mirror. Despite what happened in 2015 and 16, an overwhelming majority of Americans, including us here at U-House, refused to see a problem when Joe Biden's polls began sinking fast early in the year, or even later. And up to the day of the election, many still put down those who expressed concern. And I'll turn it back.
I'd like to ask the question, and I hope everyone in this room will give an answer. Question is, your parents and your grandparents were Robert Taft Republicans in the 1950s and 60s when you guys were all young? Please raise your hands. Come on now, there's more than that, more of you than that were.
Who's the opposition? Not sure. Yeah, not sure.
All right,
Who's the
Eisenhower
opposition?
Republicans. My thought is that those of you who grew up in those homes, and I'm speaking not of you personally necessarily, but of the vast majority of same in the country, were going to be Republican more or less automatically in presidential elections, because that's what you grew up being. And come 2024, you'd had it with Donald Trump, because his personal life was a scandal, and you couldn't tolerate that. So you were going to say, well, I still have the Republican Taft, Eisenhower standard, and Donald Trump doesn't meet it. So I'm going to vote for Harris. And in fact, for us here in this room, we can afford to say that we can afford to abandon the Republican standard. But as Barry has been saying so wonderfully, people out there who don't have the economic power that we in this room have weren't willing to do that, couldn't do that. So they didn't say, well, enough said.
Well, instead of adding something to that, let me ask who here wants to have a question or a comment? And I see several hands going up. Okay, Donna Lee, I saw yours first.
We have really received so many wonderful things to think about here. But with my background in business and everything, I'd like to take it way down to Maslow's pyramid. And we have people hurting, really scary hurting in this country. And right in this room, how many of our friends and neighbors have we lost because they can't meet these dumb increases every year in our rent? I mean, we have people on their way out right now, and when someone says to you, I've run out of money, that's scary. Now, the people on the bottom of that pyramid, you can't teach them anything until their stomach is full and their safety in their residence or wherever. And I think it's right there, and we can't straighten it out till we get these people. There's no middle class anymore. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's the people at the top, and some of us are here in it. But until we get that middle class back, we're in trouble. You can't talk to people. My son is on the other side of the mountains, for whatever reason, repairing a plane. He's been knocking on doors for the Democrats, and he said, she's gonna lose. I said, no, that's that pocket you're living in there. And he said, no, and he said, these people, he said, they really frighten me. So they're mad as hell. And that isn't just on the other side of the mountains. I think there's a lot of people in our neighborhood. I get mad every time I get the bill in August. I mean, I really get mad when I know things are at 2.3% and we're getting a bill for 7.30 or something, you know. So just what I'm saying, it's Maslow's pyramid problem.
And that's one of the biggest complaints. The Democrats aren't addressing problems of inequality. They've turned away from that. They're talking to people that have it okay, and not people who don't.
Okay.
So the question now is, what do we do next?
Yeah, that's my question.
And I want to repeat, I talked to my Christian minister son in Missouri, who was demonstrating in Ferguson. You need to take a deep breath. You need to take care of yourself. You need to walk in nature and get ready, because it takes a lot of energy to resist. Because we're going to have a lot of resistance to do, and we better be prepared, and we better get ready to do it.
This is kind of tangentially off the subject, but I think we've talked about it before, but have they ever done anything about recruiting African American residents? I mean, it's very obvious. I thought, when I came here, I couldn't believe there weren't any. And working on the plays, I was looking for some black people to play the parts, and there were only ones with the servers. I don't know if we can do a petition or talk to somebody, one of you guys up there.
I've been yelling about it for 10 years.
Yes, I know, but as someone who has spent a lot of time in very racially, ethnically integrated workplaces, we need to ask ourselves, why would any African American person or couple want to come live here with us? Seriously.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I did a lot of women's rights activist things and discovered kind of early on that there was an enormous amount of resentment on the part of women of color, of privileged, educated white women like me. So just, put that in your head and think about it. It's as painful as it is. Anybody else?
I would posit that Adolf Trump is a very sick man.
Yeah.
That he is on the verge of approaching the point of being clinically insane. And that this fact will become clear within months after he takes office, and to the extent that the 25th Amendment will be invoked, and that he is likely to be sidelined indefinitely.
It won't be because the people that he puts into office have to act in that fashion.
Well, I understand that, but one hopes that there will be enough who recognize that the man is totally incapable of governing. And I think that's the primary reason or basis for invoking the 25th Amendment. Now, of course, that would put J.D. Vance into power. He's not much better, but in my opinion, he is at least sane. So I predict that there's no way that Trump will complete 4 years. He will either be removed under the 25th Amendment, or because he leads an unhealthy lifestyle, that he will die in office.
It's much more likely.
Yeah, or suffer a massive stroke which of course that in itself would invoke the 25th Amendment.
It's probably a sin, but I've been hoping he has a heart attack. John?
He has no heart, so how can
I was going to make the same point he did. I have a couple of observations. One of the reasons Hillary lost was because of her deplorable statement just before the election. Biden's talk about garbage, however garbled it was, did us no good this time. We should learn to shut up about things like that.
Yeah.
And you had a point about Californians and my late son was a doctor in California, and I don't know why, but he also did not like her. I think he voted third party 4 years ago.
I don't know if liking came into it. I like Trump a whole lot less.
Sort of a different tack about the Christian vote. I wondered for a while the so-called right-wing or right-wing Christians, there was another name for it. I thought, well, these Christian folks believe in good values and all that, and Trump is so different from all that. Why in the heck is the Christian right supporting him? And somebody said they're transacting. You give us conservative judges, we'll give you the vote.
Well, they went so far as to say he was God's anointed. And some of them did. Here. Patty?
Oh, thanks.
Hi, if I were in New York, I'd be demonstrating down at Union Square. Is there a place in Seattle where we can demonstrate?
pretty soon there might be.
I'm serious.
Yeah.
Has there ever been?
Well, remember the Women's March in January of 2017? I don't think we're going to see one of those, but I have still been hunting for my pink pussy hat. If I find it, I'll wear it.
Although it was mentioned, I think we keep forgetting that this is just one country, but there is a movement towards the right and towards this kind of fascism, whatever we want to call it, all over the world. And I think we have to ask ourselves, why is this? And not be too much focused on just this country here. Because I see a repeat of what happened in the 1930s, and I don't think people really are astutely putting in their reflections, the wider ramifications. I would hope that we could do better, really.
Yeah, Lorraine lived through a Nazi occupation.
No, sorry.
Oh, no, if it's wrong.
This has nothing to do with the Nazi occupation. This has to do with the Nazi takeover in the 1930s. When I was a child in Germany, so I witnessed that. And I know that firsthand, although I was very young.
Karen, may I make a comment?
Karen?
Just a quick comment.
Okay. Okay, Barry and then Barry.
If Ben Franklin had been there at the time of the Weimar Republic and had asked, can you keep it? Can you keep it? What would have been the answer? They didn't keep
As
it.
it turned out,
They
no.
didn't keep it in 1930s Germany.
I just watched a thing on TV about Bund, and it was very scary.
About what?
Bund.
What's that?
Maybe some of the people here can tell us more about the Bund.
I don't know what you mean exactly. Where?
The German Nazi takeover, attempted takeover in the U.S.
Oh, New York.
The Bund.
Oh, the Nazi attempted takeover in the U.S. Okay. Yeah, I didn't recognize the term. Anybody have a comment about that? Or anything else? Okay.
Lester.
Thank you. I'm a guest here. Thank you for, this has been fantastic, but on this gentleman's term, I think it's important to remember that,
Close to your mouth.
I think it's important to remember, as this gentleman pointed out, that the American Fascist Party did fill Madison Square Garden quite regularly throughout the 30s. So, I don't want to say this too shall pass, but we've had very dark phases before that have been met by simply good people doing the right thing consistently. I hope it's that simple, but that point is salient.
I wish somebody would tell us how half the voting population of this country could vote for such a despicable person. I don't hear any mention about that they could swallow all the evil, horrible things that this man has expressed and done. Nobody's telling us how the voters could accept that many of our fellow citizens.
Anybody there?
Yeah.
I tried. But putting yourself into the mind of someone who may not be overly intelligent and is faced with a situation that they feel they cannot live with, and that there's nothing else that they can do to change it, makes the decision to go with something else, and doesn't pay a lot of attention to the price being paid, or enough attention to the price being paid. And it is wrong, it is stupid, but that's what happens, I think.
Comeuppance for all of us, pointy head, condescending,
Yes.
overeducated intellectuals.
That's not really funny, that's,
Well, I watched a lot of left-wing television giving mass footage of Trump saying all kinds of idiotic stuff. And yet, I guess Fox is more watched than any other channel. And I wonder how many voters actually saw much footage of Trump making these idiotic statements.
yeah.
Yep, that's quite a bit, you know, no one's mentioned that, but I think it's a big factor how the social media and electronic communications has completely altered the political conversation. And we're supposedly, as the saying goes, living in little echo chambers. I have to say I'm guilty of that. I force myself to take a look when I'm scrolling through news and reading the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Guardian and the Economist and all those other things. I force myself, and it's unpleasant to read what Fox News has to say, but boy, is it different.
You're way behind. You're way behind. Fox's relevance, even in the right wing, is about this much, and TikTok is that
Yeah,
much.
that's true. I'm old.
I'm old. I'm not with it anymore. Anybody else? We're kind of over time, but I'll take one more. Okay, that's it.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you, everybody.